Good morning. How you guys doing today? Good? Need a little more coffee, but you're good. You're doing good. You're awake and you're here, so that's awesome. So I'm glad to see you guys. And if you've been around the church a while, you've seen that we have 3 kids running around. And the oldest one is Charlotte, and she was our firstborn. And so when we were pregnant with Charlotte, all the wonder, the craziness, the nervousness, the scaredness of not knowing what's happening is involved in that first pregnancy. If you've had a child, you probably experienced it. You're not sure what's going to happen, how it's going to go down, things to expect. And so our first one with Charlotte got even more complicated because she came 4 weeks early. 4 weeks. I mean, that's like a month early. We were expecting her on January 18th. It is like the 20th or the 21st of December. No clue what's about to happen to us. And so my wife that day had gone and done she was working at the time. They had done her Christmas party. She was exhausted. It was a Friday night. She comes home, and I'm at home. She comes home, and I'm going to tell you some information. It may seem like TMI for a moment, but it's not really too much information. But she came home, and she had to go to the bathroom. So she goes to the bathroom. She comes out, and she goes, "Listen, I am exhausted, John. I'm so tired." And she goes, I'm just going to take a nap. Normally, we would cook dinner. And I said, "No, that's okay. Because, listen, someone has been inviting me to go to their small group Bible study for weeks. And I decided today I was going to go. So you just take a nap, and I'm going to leave." So I left. I got in the car, and I'm driving. And this drive is about 25, 30 minutes away. So we're in the Miami area. I'm on the Palmetto Expressway, driving to get there. I'm over halfway there, and suddenly my phone rings. And I look at it. It's my wife. And so I pick up the phone, and she goes, "John, I just woke up, and listen, I got to tell you something. I had to go to the bathroom." I'm like, "Okay, so things are working. Great." She goes, No, you don't understand. I was going to the bathroom, and I just kept going." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "Well, I couldn't stop going. It kept happening, and I had just gone before I went to bed, so I think my water broke." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "Yeah, I think it did because it just wouldn't stop." And I said, "Well, did you have any birth pains? I mean, you feel anything?" No, nothing's wrong." And I'm like, "Man." And we're talking about this because we'd never had a baby before, okay? We're on the phone talking, and I said, "Well, the guy I'm going to, his name was Billy, his wife is a vet, and she is a nurse. And I'm betting she's at home right now. Why don't we wait till I get there, and then if I get there and talk to her, I'll put you on the phone." Sure enough, I'm on the phone with her the whole way. We get there, and Yvette happens to be walked in. She's still in her scrubs. So I'm like, "Yvette, could you talk to my wife? I think she may have broke her water. I may be having a baby." She says, "Give me that phone." She starts talking. Now, I walk into the back room, and it's a bunch of guys. It was a men's thing, and I'm kind of I'm a little bit in shock. It's like surreal what's happening in the moment. And they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" I'm like, "Hey, it's good to see you guys." And I think I'm having a baby. And they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" "Well, my wife, I was driving over, and she thinks she broke her water." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, well, I remember my first time." They just start talking, right? It's this guy talks happening, and there's all this food. They had cooked dinner. Somebody had cooked dinner, so they're like, "Here's a plate of food." And they give me a plate full of pasta and a salad, and I'm starting to eat, and I'm just kind of thinking, I'm feeling I'm in a daze here. My wife's been talking with Yvette. And Yvette's kind of done with talking with my wife. I guess I'm hoping Yvette's talking her out of it. That's what I'm hoping is happening right now, because it's like this shouldn't be happening right now. All these thoughts are going through my mind because we haven't prepared the baby's room yet. We still had 4 more weeks. Christmas is coming. She can't be born around Christmas. That we all, everybody's like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." But we all know if you're born near Christmas, you get ripped off, don't you? You don't get the presents, the amount of presents you should get. I'm like, she shouldn't be coming at this time. And besides that, there was no birth pains. There was nothing. So this can't be happening. This is where my mind is at. And Yvette walks in. She goes, "What are you doing?" And I'm in the middle of I'm in the middle of biting a bite of food. I don't know. They're like, "You need to go." I'm like, "Where?" She's like, "Get your wife. Get her to the hospital. The water broke. You have to go." If the water breaks, if you never knew this, you have to go to the hospital. You can't wait around. You can get pains and all this stuff, but if the water breaks, you got to go. So I'm like, "Okay." And again, I'm in a daze. And she's like, "Get out of here." And the guy's like, "See you later, bud." And I'm like, "Okay." I get in my car. I drive home. There's my wife. And she's in a daze. I'm like, "Honey, are you okay?" She's walking around supposed to be packing her bags. And I'm like, "Baby, we got to go." Because this 30-minute ride back to the house, I'm thinking, we got to get over there. It's all been building in my mind now. So we get everything together. We get there. And she's starting to get pains suddenly. She's starting to get them, and we're timing them, and it's like the 5-1-1. I told you about this before, but it's like 5 minutes apart for 1 minute. No, 1 minute apart for 5 minutes straight, whatever it is, I forget now. And for a minute long, right? And we're like 2 minutes apart, and it's not quite there yet, but we're getting closer. What happens is they're farther apart, and they're not as intense, but as they get closer to the pregnancy, right, the time between them happens quicker, and also the intensity of and the length of those birth pains last longer. And so we're like, all right, let's go. And we drive, we get there. They take us to triage, and I'm like, I think we're pregnant. I think we're having a baby. They're like, okay, I can see you're a first dad. And they bring me in there, and then they look and they go, let's check her out. She's dilated to 6 centimeters. They're like, what? You're already at 6 centimeters? And you broke your water? Get her to a birthing room now. Like, this was great because we didn't have to wait for anything. We're in the birthing room. 2.5 hours later, boom, Charlotte was born. This is a picture of Charlotte when she was born. Here we go. There she is. Look at how cute she is. She was looking around. Honestly, God's flipped a switch. When I saw her, I was on her like crazy. This is my baby, and I fell in love with her. Here's when she was going home. She was a preemie. You see how big my hand was, by the way? Look at how tiny she is. This is the car seat. You can't even fit it in. There she is, this little tiny. She was called a full-term preemie. And there she was. But the weird thing was she wasn't supposed to be coming. This was weird, right? The problem with all 3 of our pregnancies was that my wife breaks her water before she has birth pains, okay? So we never knew. Now, in the other 2, she had like some Braxton Hicks, or she had false labor, so we kind of had an idea, but it was still days before we would know. Once that water broke, we had to be ready to go because she was already dilated most of the time, and we had to run. And the other birth stories are even more amazing, and I didn't even tell you all this one. Someday I'm going to share those with you too. But that's the thing about birth pains, right? They usually give you a warning. You should get them ahead of time, so you kind of like, okay, it's starting to happen. Let's get ready, right? We didn't have any of that. And like I said before, the birth pains, they start farther apart. They get a little more intense, and so it's kind of like a clock ticking, and you got to get an idea. It would have been great if we had a warning that Charlotte was coming early. We had been prepared. I would have had the room ready. We would have had stuff ready, our bags packed, all this kind of stuff. And so sometimes there's an advantage to knowing what's going to happen before it happens, isn't it? We kind of want to know the future, and I think all of us have this fascination of knowing what the future holds. That's why fortune tellers make so much money, right? Because there are people that go to fortune tellers to find out what's going to happen in their future. They want to know what's going to happen in relationships. Oh, you're going to meet a tall, dark, handsome man. It's like in your future, somewhere in the distance, I see this, and we get all excited, right? Or if we want to know, is this business venture going to work out? And we might say, can you tell me this investment, what I'm doing, this is the right thing to do? Or maybe what's going to happen to us financially. I see numbers in your future. The lottery, yes, who knows? This is what we do. But why is knowing the future helpful for you and me? Because it helps us avoid future problems, right? With my daughter, if I'd known, we could have got to the hospital on time. It can also bring us expectation and hope because we're thinking, okay, something good is going to happen. Wow, I'm looking forward to this coming in my life. Or it can give us confidence and assurance because we already know what's going to happen. We're not as nervous. We're a little bit more prepared. And it can just help us be in a place where we are prepared, right? And maybe if you have a lot of questions about the future, especially lately, right? We've had some crazy years. Years like we haven't, a year like last year was like no other year most of us have seen in the history of our lives. Think about it. There was a worldwide pandemic. It wasn't a pandemic in certain areas, like, oh, it's going off. We've seen that with Ebola and these other things where it happens in Africa and different places, but this world has been shut down because of it, right? We wonder, are there going to be more rounds of COVID? They're talking about a 4th wave, or they're talking about variants. And what does that mean for you and me? What is that going to do to us in our own private lives? Or maybe we're wondering, with this new administration, we're hearing about China and Russia, are we actually going to get in a war with China? Are we going to get in a war with Russia? How about this housing market, right? People are going crazy buying. You can't even, we were looking for our house, we would find a posting, and if it was 3 days off that we were going to go see it, it was probably sold by the time we got there. And the prices are being driven up, and we're wondering, is this a recurrence of what was happening in 2008? Is there a bubble? Is it going to burst? What is going on? What does this all mean for you and me today? And so today we're going to talk about and take a look at what God says we can expect in the future. Are these signs that we're living in signs of the times of things to come? Should we stock up on toilet paper and get ready or not, right? Because if we had known a year ago, I would have stocked up on a lot more. I would have bought stock in it. But what should we look for in the future. So we're finishing our series, The Good Life, which is a study in the book of Mark. And so we skipped the chapter 13, and we're going to go back and look at that chapter because it's a glimpse that Jesus gives us into the future of this world. What is going to happen? And so before we get started, though, I just want to say a couple of things. And first, this is not a typical message that you would hear from the stage here on a Sunday. So it's a little bit more of like a teaching. We're going to study and look at what the Bible says, and I'm going to try to give you just the tip of the iceberg. Because the truth is, there is so much in the Bible that talks about the end times. There are 3 books that are almost dedicated to what happens in the end time. One we're all aware of, which is called Revelation. But there are 2 others. And if you want to write this down on your notes, you can just put Daniel, and you can also write Ezekiel, because there are some vivid pictures of what happens in the future in those books. Not only that, almost every book has prophecy in it. You see, it's one of the ways that we know that we can trust the Bible, is because there is prophecy that has actually come true. Prophecy from hundreds or even thousands of years ago, speaking to what would happen even in our day today. For instance, there are 350 prophecies approximately of who the Messiah would be, Jesus himself. And the things that Jesus did, that he would die on a cross, that he would be born of a virgin, all these things were written in the Old Testament, and they become true in their fulfillment in this man, Jesus Christ. Almost every book of the Bible has prophecy in it. And in this summer, we're going to be doing a series that will boost our faith. We're going to look at a lot of things to help boost our faith in the Bible and Christianity. And we're going to cover one day this idea of prophecy in the Bible and why we believe we can trust it. So if that's a teaser for you, I hope you will stick with us and come back to make sure you hear those. But the second thing I want you to know is not just about prophecy in the Bible, but the second thing is that all things eventually come to an end, don't they? We all know that one day this planet is going to end, the planet that we live on. Science tells us that the stars, as they die, supernova, right? They get super hot, and eventually this planet will be uninhabitable. We can't live on this planet. There's been movies based on solar flares that have destroyed the population of this planet. And so one day, from a natural perspective, there will be an end. And it shouldn't surprise us that if the Bible speaks about the earth's beginnings, then it would also talk about the earth's endings. It shouldn't surprise us. And so we also believe that you and I have an eternal spirit. I mean, that's our hope, right? That's why we're here, because we believe that someday we will spend eternity with God. What does that look like? What leads up to those things? And so these things the Bible speaks about, and we're going to be talking about some of that today. And so Jesus right now, he's hanging out in Mark 13 with his disciples on the Mount of Olives. And so the Mount of Olives there was a valley between them and then the Temple Mount. So they're like in the east, they're looking to the west, and there they could see spread out before them Jerusalem. And the Temple Mount would have been right in front of them on top of that next hill, and they would have seen the temple standing there. And it was beautiful with all its other buildings that Herod had built and made it glorious. And they used this, what's called Jerusalem stone if you go there. It's basically like a sandstone. It's very, very light. And so when the sun would shine on it, especially the temple, because it was overlaid with gold, it would shine like the sun. So you can only imagine they're sitting there looking at this grand display before them, and this conversation strikes up between them and Jesus. And we're going to look at this conversation. It starts here. So then as he went out of the temple, Jesus and one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here." So they're looking at all this. And Jesus answered and said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? You say this is all going to happen. When will it be? And what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled?" And Jesus, answering them, began to say, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and will deceive many. But when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be troubled, for such things must happen. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows. But watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to councils, and you will be beaten in the synagogues. You will be brought before rulers and kings for my name's sake, for a testimony to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all the nations. But when they arrest you and deliver you up, do not worry beforehand, or premeditate what you will speak, but whatever is given to you in that hour, speak that, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. Now brother will betray brother to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. So he's up there, and these guys ask him the question. And basically they're asking him like kind of two questions. These two questions are, when will this age end and Messiah's reign begin? What are the signs and when will this happen? Are two of the things that he is asking. And you got to understand that they're asking this from a Jewish mindset. It's Jewish men asking a Jewish rabbi what the Jewish future will be. And so sometimes we look on at this and we kind of put ourselves in the place of those people. Now these things will still happen and we are involved, but we have to understand that primarily we're talking about a Jewish culture and what's happening to the Jewish people here. And so when will these things happen? When will this new kingdom come is what they're asking. And keep in mind that this is just before Jesus is about to die and go to the cross. And so they have no idea what's about to take place. And they're a little bit confused, and their understanding is clouded, like ours will be if we don't understand prophecy. And so they ask these two questions. When is the sign of these things that will come? Or what is the sign of these things that will come to pass? And when will these things take place? And so in order to understand what Jesus is talking about, you and I must understand a Jewish timeline through history. Now, fortunately, it had been given to us over 600 years before this moment that they're having this conversation. And it was given to a man named Daniel. He lived at a time when the Jewish people were taken captive in an area by a kingdom called Babylon. They were taken out of their land, out of Jerusalem, out of Israel, and they were taken captive. They're living in Babylon at this time. And Daniel is praying, and he says, Lord, when are you going to return us back to our land? When are these things going to come? And then the angel Gabriel comes to him with a message and gives them this timeline. And he tells them this prophecy that when Jerusalem will be rebuilt, when they'll return, when Jerusalem will be built, when the Messiah will actually come, when he'll show up, and when will he die. It's all written there. But we're not going to get into that today because we don't have enough time. But in the future, I'd love to share that with you, especially when we review the book of Daniel. And then he tells all the way to the end of when vision and prophecy will be sealed up, is what he says at the beginning of this prophecy. And these are the final verses of the prophecy. I want you to see them on the screen. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So the people of the ruler is not Jesus, but this other guy comes, and he's going to destroy the temple and the city. And this happens, and we spoke about this, when Jesus, after he died in 70 AD, the Jewish people rebel against the Romans, and they come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end will come like a flood. Now he jumps to the end of history. He says, war will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So he jumps and he says, he will confirm a covenant, referring to a leader, with many for 1/7. Go ahead. And in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at that and the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So it's this weird kind of prophecy. You're saying, what's going on here, John? He talk about the destruction of the temple, but then he jumps to the end and he says there's one more 7. In some Bible translations it says week, a week, like a week, 7-day week. And this word 7 is a word in Hebrew. It's called Shabuah. Shabuah, which means a period of 7 or 7 years, is what he's referring to. Just like we refer to 10 years as a decade, you and I would say it's a decade, it's 10 years. They would have referred to a Shabuah as a 7-year period. So there is this one 7-year period that is remaining to fulfill prophecy for the Jewish people, which hasn't happened at the time of Jesus and hasn't happened yet, as far as we know, in our time. So there's this future 7-year period that God is going to work through the Jewish people. Now, I provided in your outline, if you'll pull it out, there's a half sheet of paper, and it has the timeline to make things clearer for you. So you see here, it says timeline at the top. And if you want to fill in here, the crucifixion happens right here. So this is going to happen in only a couple days after this prophecy that Jesus is speaking about. And between this moment And this 7-year period is what's called the church age. So between here and here is the church age. That's you and me. And God right now, instead of working through Israel, it says that they're blinded at this time, and because they missed the Messiah at this point, He is working through you and me to let other people know about God in this world. He's using you and I. But there is going to come a period of 7 years, this one Shabuah that's left, that God is going to use the Jewish people to tell people, the world, again, about who God is, who Jesus is, basically. And they are going to be His witnesses during that period of time. Now, it must be you got to understand something, that the Jewish people are still waiting for a Messiah. Now, there are Jewish people, kind of like Christians, that kind of believe or don't believe they're God, right? Okay? But if you were to talk to a very hardened Jewish person who says, I believe in God, who hasn't yet believed in Jesus, but they will say to you, I'm waiting for the Messiah. They believe that the Messiah is coming. And they believe that He will come, and this rabbi around the Middle Ages, he wrote this quote. His name is Maimonides. And Maimonides was a famous rabbi. He says, anyone who does not believe in Him, the Messiah, or who does not wait for His arrival, has not merely denied the other prophets, but has also denied the Torah and Moses, our rabbi. So he's like, if you don't believe in the Messiah, like if you're Jewish, you're a hardcore Jewish person, you don't believe that there's a Messiah coming, this is like 1,000 years after Jesus, he says, then you don't believe in prophecy. You also don't believe in the Moses. You don't believe in our Jewish books, basically, the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible. You see, the Jewish people believe that the Messiah, and they believe today, Maimonides wrote down some things that he believed the Messiah would do, and here's a couple of them. He will be a descendant of King David, as we all believe that he was, and he will gather the Jewish people together, but also he will rebuild the temple. Because right now the temple doesn't exist. And in order for Jewish worship to begin again during that last 7-year period, there needs to be a temple standing. You see, there was an expectation that a figure will arise to fulfill these requirements. This is why Jesus is warning them about false messiahs. Right? There are many false messiahs who are going to arise, but be careful. Don't go after them. Basically, I've already come. I'm already here. So if you're following after one that's not me, it's something else. This figure who arises, by the way, he will pretend to be the Messiah. Now, this idea of Messiah is a very volatile subject with the Jewish people. It is not uncommon if a Jewish person decides that they are going to follow Jesus to be abandoned and denied by their family. They will excommunicate them. They will kick them out. They'll say, listen, he's not it. I can't even talk to you anymore. Fathers and sons, husbands and wife, children and parents. And Jesus is saying, listen, when these messiahs come and they start to follow one or the other, and if the other person doesn't believe it, there is going to be strife between those families. Does that make sense of what he was saying now? Because he says, when these people arrive, there's going to be arguments over who he was. And it could be so big a deal that they're just going to say, see you later. I'll never talk to you again. I disown you. And this could happen, and it probably will happen in those times because Jesus tells us it will. Now, there will be this figure that arises that we have often called the Antichrist, because he's not the Christ, but he poses himself as the Messiah. And many people probably have heard that word, the Antichrist. And we use it to call people like President Trump or Biden or Obama or whoever, right? You're the Antichrist. Everybody's saying they're the Antichrist, or whoever else we're saying he's an Antichrist. What does that mean? Well, this is a figure that arises during this time, toward the end, and he will usher in peace. In the beginning, he's not going to come and be a man of war. He actually ushers in peace, and he allows and makes a treaty so that the Jewish temple can be built. If you were to go to Jerusalem right now, and you were to look at the Temple Mount, you would not see a Jewish temple standing there. You would see a shrine that is dedicated to Muhammad that sits there right now for the Muslim people. Where is the temple? It doesn't exist. And for order that to happen, he's going to have to be a really good peace treaty guy to make sure that that temple is built right next to the Muslim temple or the Muslim shrine that exists there today. Now, this figure, many people will follow. The Jewish people will begin to follow because they will be under a heavy influence. Those that believe in Jesus will not believe in him, but they will be very tempted to, because he will do signs and wonders that will fool you and I. In fact, he will fake his own death and resurrection. Listen to what it says in Revelation as we peek forward. He says, I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. He refers to the Antichrist as a beast, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. They're like, he fakes it, and everybody's like, whoa, he came back from the dead. It's kind of interesting. He mimics Jesus. And they didn't follow Jesus, but they go like, this guy, look at what he can do. If anyone can come back from the dead, then we should all follow him. And that's what begins to happen. You see, we don't know who the Antichrist is yet, or if he's alive today. We don't know that. But one thing is clear, that things are going to get worse before they get better. Because as Jesus was talking about what's going to happen there, he begins to describe the conditions of the earth before his return. And there's wars breaking out all over the planet. There's earthquakes and tsunamis and natural disasters and famine and pestilence and plagues and, yes, pandemics. It is also characterized by a time of persecution of people who are following Jesus, especially those who are Jewish people following Jesus. And it will get harder and harder to live out our faith in opposition to what the world is trying to do. And we may see that some places. And we've gone through periods of our history and time where we have martyrs who have died in missionary places where they tried to tell people about God, but they were killed for their faith. And there are political changes that are also happening. The Bible alludes to the fact that there will be a one world government. 10 nations will join together. And at the top of that will be ruled by one man who would be the Antichrist figure. And this is how he gains a lot of his power among the people. Jesus describes these events as the beginning of sorrows. That word beginning of sorrows or sorrows is the word that is used for birth pains. That's part of why I started the message this way. Because he says these things will be like birth pains. They're beginning of sorrows. You see, as we see them happening, we're going to see them happen in greater intensity and more frequency. And I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of things happening over and over that I didn't see earlier when I was younger. And I don't know if just because we haven't been recording it, but it seems like we're moving closer and closer to that period of time. They will start slowly, but they will increase in frequency and intensity. And so what is the lesson? And there is a lesson for you and me today. And if you'll pull out your outline, if you haven't already, just for the outline itself or the timeline, but there's a first fill-in, and I want you to know this, and that's this. Hold on loosely to this world because it's passing away. Hold on loosely to this world because it's passing away. You see, a lot of the fear that we have is because we're like, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose everything. And we slowly feel ground slipping out beneath us as we see things, maybe policy changes that we're not in agreement with, or we see things being more risky for us financially or whatever it is, and we get a little bit nervous. And every summer, you guys have met my niece Valentina. She's here. Her mom Julie sings up here on the stage. And they're Colombian. I don't know if you know that. My wife is Colombian. You wouldn't even know it to look at her. She was born there. And they would go back on the summers a lot. And so Julie would send her daughter back often for the summer to go to Colombia. And once she was in Colombia, her aunt one time thought it would be really cool because there's a lot of farms there. And there was one farm she went to, and she bought these little chickens. And it's not you may not agree with this practice, but they often dye chickens' colors. Have you ever seen that? So I got some up here, look like this right here. They actually dye the chicks, and so they brought the chicks. They just roll them in dye is really all they do. But they bring them to her, and she's got one of these little chicks, and she loves it so much that she's holding on to it, and they can't let go of it, right? Because she's like, oh, I love this little chick, and they're like, give it back to us now. Give it back. And she keeps holding on. She's walking around all day with it. Well, I can only say that she loved it so much and hugged it and squeezed it so much that when they got it back from her, it was no longer living, okay? Sorry. A lot of sad stories today. Don't worry. Hopefully we have a good ending. The chick was no more. And that's what happens with us when we hold on to something so tightly, isn't it? You ever notice we hold on to things so tightly because we're afraid of losing it or because we like it so much, and that's what happens when we grip it so tightly. We hold on to it that we tend to kill whatever it is that we have. And God is kind of giving us a little bit of a warning here. Jesus is like, look at, guys, if you hold on to stuff too much, you're going to end up losing it anyway. So don't hold on to it too much. We can hold on to something and it can become our obsession. We get more focused on losing that item than actually enjoying the item that we have sometimes. You ever seen that? You buy a brand new car and we're so obsessed the first scratch drives us nuts, right? It's like it drives us crazy. I can't believe I scratched this car. Instead of being like, you know what, who cares? Let me just enjoy the car, And that's the way it is with life and the things that we have. We get a fear of losing it. It consumes us with relationships, with money, with possessions. And this just serves as a reminder to you and me that everything in this world is only temporary. The only thing that we should hold on tightly to is Jesus, because he's the only one that can bring us peace of mind. Listen to what Jesus said. Same night, he's talking to them. Actually, a little bit later, he gives this conversation. I'm leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace that I give you is a gift the world can't give. So don't be troubled or afraid. It's like there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen. He's about to die. They're going to get really crazy. He's like, look, I can give you a peace that the world can't give you. You see, you're going to look on and see all these things happening. I'm going to be disappearing, right? But I can bring a peace into your heart that nothing else in this world can give. You can put your energy, your confidence in many different things, but the only thing that's going to bring peace is Jesus Christ in your heart. So do your best. Remain diligent. But in the end, don't put your faith in wealth, possessions, money, or career, just because all that's going to pass away. Put your faith in Jesus. Because the truth is, it's going to get even a little worse than what he just said. Let's go on. Jesus keeps talking. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. Before you move on for a second, when you were on the top, they had a rooftop on most of their homes, that's where they would hang out, like a patio, not on the ground, but on the top of their roof. And they would often just walk down the stairs and outside stairs. So he's saying, look, don't go back into your house. You don't have time for that. So when you're on your rooftop, it's not like you and I sitting on our roof, like on a tile roof or anything like that. So thank you. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes, but woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation such as not been seen since the beginning of creation, which God has created until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or look, he is there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. But take heed. See, I have told you these things beforehand. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of the heaven will fall, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest parts of the earth to the farthest parts of heaven. Halfway through this 7-year period, the 7-year period, it's marked by a certain event. So if you go back to your outline for a minute, we're going to put it back up on the screen here. This moment right here, halfway through, I put 3.5 on one side, 3.5 on the other, is what's called the Abomination of Desolation. This weird event occurs. And it's a marker for them to understand, those living in that time, for the Jewish people to understand things. What is this moment? We read about it when Daniel spoke about it. He refers to Daniel. But Daniel made a prediction that this would happen. And it kind of already occurred in one sense. You see, it happened in 167 BC, before Christ came. So that we know this is not the one that he's talking about, but this would give us a glimpse as to what to expect. And this happened during the Greek Empire. Before the Roman Empire, there was the Greek Empire, and it was taken over and won mostly by a man named Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, after he had conquered the world, sat down and said, what else is there to do? And he was about 32 years old. He wasn't married, didn't have kids, had no heirs, and he died of pneumonia one night. And on his deathbed, he said, who should we leave the kingdom to? And he said, leave it to the strong. And so the 4 top generals that he had divided the kingdom. This is all true history. You can just look it up. They divided basically the kingdom, the world. And one of those was called the Seleucid. Seleucid dynasty came from him. They ruled the area of the Middle East. And one man named Antiochus Epiphanes, who came to power, he gets mad one day. He's in a rage, goes to Jerusalem, and he goes into the temple that still existed, and he destroys a lot of things that are happening there. He sacrifices, he kills many of the priests. He sacrifices pigs on the altar, which was not a no-no, basically, for the Jewish people. He caused them to drink their blood, and then he set up an altar of Zeus on top of the altar to be worshipped. Now, this was a big deal for them. You see, it was huge, because you'll notice that what's unique about the Jewish religion is they do not have an image of their God, right? If you want to see Zeus, you can find Zeus. There was all these Old Testament images of idols that they worshiped. Dagon was a half fish, half man. There was the woman Ishtar, and she had multiple breasts because she was a god of fertility. There were all these images of these other gods, but the Jewish people have no image of their God. And today you still can't find one. And there was no image in their temple. And so for anyone to put up an image of a god in their temple was anathema. It was an abomination. And that abomination, when it is set up in the temple, would cause them to abandon the temple, or they would cause it to be desolate. And that's what the abomination of desolation means, or causes desolation. You see, the Antichrist will come and set up an image of himself. If you read Revelation chapter 13, you can write it down. He sets up an image of himself, and he causes everyone to worship that image. And if you don't worship that image or bow down to it, then you will end to receive a mark that marks you to say that this man worshiped me. If you don't receive those, then you cannot buy or sell, or you could also be killed. So it gets really scary at that moment. And the Jewish people in that moment, when they set up this God to be worshipped, they realize, wait a minute, we followed the wrong guy. And it says their eyes will be wakened. It will be like scales falling from their eyes, and they will recognize him who he pierced. They pierced, it says in prophecy. They will realize it was Jesus. And he says at that moment, guys, you need to run. You need to get out of there, because if you don't worship him, you're going to be killed. And that's what happens. But God is going to protect those people. And we don't have time to get into that today, but he's going to protect those people. And this is the sign that the Antichrist is not the Messiah, and that they need to go. And then we also see these things happen, that persecution intensifies, and that there's the cataclysmic events. The sun won't shine for months. The moon won't shine. There's volcanic actions going on that are shifting the tectonic plate movement. The stars are falling from the sky. I mean, it is getting crazy at this point. This is what the Bible tells us. But before all this happens, before all is destroyed, Jesus returns. And so I want you to know this in your outline. Then this is your second point. Trust Jesus in all circumstances, because he wins in the end. He comes back. He comes back. Yes, amen. See, there's nothing new here that Jesus is actually telling us. And there's nothing new in the book of Revelation. If you were to read the book of Revelation, and many of us are scared to open that book, and it's actually not that hard to understand, because there's so much prophecy before it in the Old Testament that describes all of the events. It helps us actually to understand what is going to be happening there. But there's so many, it comes from different places. And this time that we're talking about right now is spoken about as the time of Jacob's trouble in the Old Testament. You see, Jacob was one of the two sons of Isaac, the son of Abraham, the promised child, who which the Messiah would come. And Jacob, his line, he wrestles with God one night, and from his line comes the 12 tribes of Israel, because he wrestles with God, and he says at that moment, God renames him Israel. From Jacob to Israel. And so the time of Jacob's trouble, or basically Israel's trouble, if you will, listen to the prophecy here in Jeremiah, speaking before Christ ever came. In all history, there has never been such a time of terror. Speaking of this future time for Israel. It will be a time of trouble for many, for my people Israel. Yet, in the end, they will be saved. So there's going to be a time like never before. It's going to be a time of trouble for them, but in the end, they will be saved. God protects his people and keeps the Antichrist from destroying them. This is a time of persecution like no other on this planet. And the armies of the world begin to band together and surround Jerusalem. And they're going to come and attack at a place called Megiddo. And that's where we get the word Armageddon. Have you ever heard the word Armageddon? Sometimes we refer to it as the whole 7-year period. But it's a giant war that breaks out at the very end of the 7-year period. They come to surround the nation of Jerusalem to take it out. And God comes from heaven. You can read about it in Revelation chapter 19. Jesus comes back on a horse, and all of us are coming back with him. And there's this giant battle that takes place. Napoleon, when he was conquering the world, saw this battlefield, and he said it was the greatest battlefield he'd ever seen. My wife and I have stood there. You can Google it, and it's amazing. It's like this giant field that goes on forever, no mountains. It's incredible. But what happens at that time, back to your outline, just to kind of sum up what's going on here, you will see that Jesus returns at the end of that 7-year period, number 5. And then he ushers in, we're not going to get into it today, but what's called the millennial, 1,000-year reign of peace on the earth. That's what the Bible tells us, Revelation chapter 20 and 21. And then at the end of that 1,000 years, there's the white throne judgment, where God creates a new heaven and new earth where we live with him forever. And you're like, wow, I never even knew that existed. It all exists in the Bible. That's what happened to me one day when I really read it. I'm like, I never knew this existed. And at that time, that final judgment, that's when people will be raised from the dead, people will be judged. You and I will be there, but we will already have been judged, and we will be with Jesus Christ. You see, no matter how bad it gets, we need to put our faith in Jesus Christ. That's where we need to put our faith. Because it's He who comes back and conquers all. It's Him who does all the work. And Him who does all the work when it came to your and my salvation. And the thing is, sometimes we think, it's going to get bad, we need to do something. We don't need to do something. Jesus will do everything. We just need to put our faith in Him and remain diligent, because He always wins. We look on and wonder at this time, and we wonder, when will this happen? And this was the question that they had. We're almost done, by the way, so I just want you to know this, but we're going to finish reading the last part of the chapter, and he says this, "Now learn this parable from the fig tree." Guys, I want you to understand something. He says, "When the branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that it is near at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. It is like a man going to a far country, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to each his own work, and commanded the doorkeeper to keep watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, watch." So he leaves us this admonition to be watchful of what is going to happen when that time will come. And so that's the last part of your outline, is this: be watchful, because Jesus is coming back. Be watchful because Jesus is coming back. You have maybe have wondered where you and I are at this juncture in our lives, right? What's going on? Where's the church in all of this that's happening? Because we're wondering, where is it? Because we are with Jesus. Listen to what it says. If we were to peek into Revelation, in the beginning of Revelation, God speaks to the church. There's 7 letters to the churches, and He speaks to us saying this, and to the church of Philadelphia. Be watchful is the point. Go to the next slide. He says, "Because you have obeyed my command to persevere, I will protect you from the great time of testing that will come upon the whole world to test those who belong to this world." You see, a lot of us go, man, are we going to go through this tribulation? Are we going to experience this wrath that's coming upon the earth? And the Bible tells us that you and I are believers in Jesus Christ, that no, we're not going to be there. In fact, the church is not going to be there, because it's not a time for the church any longer. If I spoke to you earlier and you heard it, I said it was the time for the Jewish people to be used again by God. And God is going to speak to them through them. There's going to be 2 witnesses that can perform all these great and wonderful works. You can read about in the book of Revelation. There's 144,000 from the tribes of Israel, 122 from each of those tribes, who are going to be raised up, that are going to be preaching the gospel to this world. And there are going to be people that are coming to know Jesus during that time. There's going to be Jewish people coming to know Him, and there are going to be people, Gentiles, those who are not Jewish people, coming to know Jesus in those moments. And some of them are going to flip to this Bible verse, and they're going to read that, and they're going to realize we're in this moment right now. You see, Jesus tells you and I to be watchful. Because their question is, when's this going to happen? We see this beautiful building. What's it going to be? When is it going to be torn down? When are you going to usher into the kingdom? When does it come back? And you and I may still have that question. We kind of put it off maybe because we're thinking, well, it's not going to be in our lifetimes. Maybe that's thousands and thousands of years away. The truth is, we don't know. He says the angels don't know. Jesus didn't even know at that time. He says, I have given my authority, my God power away while I'm here on earth, so that I don't even know it. Only God in heaven knows it. But He said, do this. Be watchful and mindful of the birth pains that are coming. He says, when you see a tree in the spring, and some people think it refers to Jerusalem or to Israel, and it's possible that it does, but it should just remind us that when we see a tree blossoming in the spring, we know that it's going to bear fruit soon, right? We know that it's going to be, something's going to happen. There's something that's going to be changing. And He says, when you see the signs that I'm speaking about, you're seeing a tree growing. It's like that. You're going to know that the time is near. The question for you and me is like, are we in that time? Things are getting crazy. There are a lot of signs that we've seen that we are closer than we ever been before, and that's an easy thing to say because, of course, we're closer to the future than anyone else has ever been. But the idea that the people of Israel are gathered together as a people, when 70 AD occurred and they were destroyed and they were left the temple, they were not returned to the land for almost 2,000 years until 1948 when the UN decided to give them a homeland. They were spread throughout the nations. And David Ben-Gurion and a few others decided that they were going to declare themselves the Jewish state, a country. That happened in May of 1948. And then they were able to take all of Jerusalem and even the Temple Mount by war in 1967 during the Six-Day War. Throwing out some weird things for you, but like these things we see. These things we see the blossoming happening, the stage being set so that there could possibly be a temple soon. We see so many different things happening when it comes to the events that are going on around us. They were like, yeah, we may be moving closer and closer to that moment. But why? Why should we keep watch? Why? Because there are many people out there that don't yet know Jesus. You see, we shouldn't be scared when we see these things happening. Why? Because it should encourage us that Jesus is coming back, that there's a better place than this, that justice actually exists, because in those days, those things will happen. Justice will be meted out. You and I, we see injustice in the world, and we're like, when's this person going to be paying for these sins? When is this going to happen that these poor people that are being hurt and destroyed are going to get justice? You and I think that, and in the end, God rectifies all of those things. And I don't wish anything bad upon anyone, but I do wonder some days, God, when are you going to make things right? And so when we see these things coming, we should know that these things are coming soon. And one of the biggest questions anyone has when an obstacle to faith is, why do bad things happen in this world? It's because you and I keep messing things up, and God says, someday I'm going to make it right. That 1,000-year period, that reign where he comes back with us, is a period where there's no satanic influence in our lives. We enjoy peace as God had meant it to be. And that's where some of those verses, the lamb will lie down with the lion. In that time, there won't be animals even killing animals. We'll be able to enjoy ourselves for 1,000 years because God says, this is what I wanted you to see. This is the way I wanted it to be. And so sometimes we can have the choice to say, look, I see all this stuff happen. We can get scared. We can hold on to what we have. But God's saying, listen, that's all going to disappear anyway. But I got something better for you. I got a place for you that you're going to enjoy. But we should be watchful, because not everyone knows Jesus the way we know Jesus. And he's saying, listen, be watchful, be mindset. We should have a sense of urgency. And as we see these things happening in our world today, we shouldn't get scared, but we should say, man, I need to let more people know about the God who saved me, about the God who loves you and me, that the God who never gives up. Because right now, Jesus is saving people, and in the tribulation, Jesus will still be saving people. In those verses in book of Revelation where he's addressing the church, I love this verse because there are going to be people who are reading this. And it says this, Jesus speaking says, this verse is coming up, look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. He's saying, listen, I'm standing there waiting. I love the picture of this. There's a door closed, and on the other side, someone is knocking. Have you ever had someone knocking on your door at your house? Someone that you've been waiting for and you don't want them to go away, but then they leave? Right? I thought you weren't home. Jesus is still knocking. For 1,000 years, 2,000 years, Jesus has been knocking on that other side of the door. He stands there still. Anyone who wants to open it freely, you open that door and I'll come in. And I'll share a meal with you. We'll become one, and I'll be with you forever. This is the hope that we have. And I just want to say as we close that if you've never decided to trust in Jesus, my goal was not to scare you into doing it today, but to just tell what the Bible says. These are God's words. These aren't my words. And everything that I've spoken to you about, you can find it in the Bible. And if you want to, you can email me and I'll send you the verse and I'll show you where it happens. But God is saying these things to us because there is an urgency. Because he doesn't want you to experience those things that are not good, that are terrible. He wants you to experience his love, his forgiveness, his peace, and his freedom, because that's the God who loves you. And he stands at the door and knocks today. And all you have to do is open the door and let him into your heart. And the way to do that is just to say a simple prayer. And so if that's you today, I just want to offer you this prayer to repeat after me. And let's just all pray together. Lord God, I open my heart. I invite you inside to be my God, my Savior, and my friend. Forgive me of my sins. Wash me clean. I've decided today to follow you, Jesus, from this day forever. I'm yours. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Hey, let's clap for a moment.